This is Abigail on spirituality and faith in Uganda. In this clip, I'm going to focus on a myth modern rationalists often reach when they encounter the spiritual ritual traditions of other cultures. I find traditions very fascinating, especially spirit traditions and legends. It gives me such a fascinating window into the worldview of indigenous people. Often there are traditions around key events like child naming, like initiation into adulthood. There are healing traditions and rituals, and those all sound very empowering and good. There's a book I've encountered recently by Karl Hammerschlag called The Theft of the Spirit. The author is a medical doctor who tells the story of his own transformation in his encounter with the Hopi of New Mexico. There are issues larger than the book, but Dr. Hammerschlag encounters or highlights the Hopi's more empowering spiritual ritual traditions. They had an easily accessible creator God, which resonated with the doctor's own Jewish traditions. And without a doubt, some of the Hopi's traditions and rituals never made it into this century. So Dr. Hammerschlag, like so many benign, sophisticated Americans, he glorifies the Hopi traditions and bemoans the losses and the theft that modernization has brought the Hopi. And he's very honest and true in that evaluation, but that is where it ends. However, I want to underscore the reality that spiritual and ritual traditions everywhere in all people are a mixed bag. In a rational culture that does not value a spirit reality, it is suspect at best to be an expert or say anything about spirit traditions. However, here I am. As someone who has lived and acknowledged the spirit realm, I will point out a number of observations. First, I will note that not all spiritual ritual traditions are empowering or at best benign. The child naming, the initiation into adulthood, some things are more empowering than others. However, there are some very evil traditions and rituals which are impossible to say that they are even benign at best. The Aztecs have some very pronounced traditions that we remember. The human sacrifices that periodically took place at the pinnacle of the pyramid, these were made to the gods the people knew and feared. One can hardly argue for the continuation of that ritual and calling it good. Second, within traditions, I can often identify certain themes. One theme is of creator God. The Hopi had a great spirit called Masao. It was a creator spirit, the great spirit, who gave his spirit the life plan or the way to life. To deviate from this spirit's instructions was to embrace disaster in both humankind and in nature. The Buganda, my husband's people, they also have a creator God. He was known as the supreme God, also called Katonda. He was also a creator and the father of all the other gods. Yet the people of Buganda, whose lives and reality is enmeshed with the spirits of this or that ritual for everything, they have little time and honor for the Katonda, as Roscoe reports. The Katonda has a small temple on Banda Hill in Kiagwe district. It's a holy place, very inferior to the shrines honoring the other gods, like the god of plenty or the god of war. The attitude of the people is that the Katonda came and created things, and then he left. And he left living life and business on earth to be orchestrated by the other more inferior gods. I get my citation from J. Roscoe, 25 years in East Africa. Now this seems very fitting to even the current reality of the Buganda people today. Each tribe has their shrine where the gods of their tribe are honored. Some seem somewhat benign, others, like the shrine of the family of Joseph Kony, not so benign. In fact, Kony's War is commonly known in Uganda as the war that was initiated and orchestrated by the gods Kony worship, the spirits of his ancestors. There are some counselors and healers in northern Uganda who are working on the healing process of those children who were participants in the war. Many people who work with these children when they were abducted and used as child soldiers. And then they were sent back to their own villages to brutalize their families and community. Those that work with them give accounts of how they even now have to overcome the powerful spirit that comes and attempts to take over their body and causes them to want to do what they used to do, which is violently brutalize people around them, overpowering them and cutting off their lips, noses, and ears and raping them. Kony's reality is a mix of Muslim animism and Christianity, evidenced by his claims to be King David. His army is the Lord's Resistance Movement. He's considered a prophet because he tells the future. He leads his soldiers into mystic rituals that involve both Muslim animistic and Christian things. He talks about invoking the Holy Spirit and other spirits. Yet wherever his army is, there's misery and destruction, which Kony often blames on Uganda's NRM for doing the deeds and framing the LRM. Yet even I recognize this as a common tactic in Uganda. Whatever evil thing somebody does or decides to do, they say it is another person who has done it. Ultimately, I emphasize that the cultural rituals and traditions are continually evolving, but also are a mixed bag of good or evil. And whether it is good or evil is subject to human evaluation and choice, both inside and outside the culture. Cultural rituals and traditions that are passed down are not holy and untouchable, even for those they serve and that serve and revere them. They change from generation to generation. The Buganda revere their family spirits and consult them. Yet they also choose whether to visit this or that shrine, whether it is Katonda's shrine or the God of Plenty. While there are spirits and cultural rituals intertwined with regional conflicts, such as Kony's War, there are spirit rituals demanding Aztec sacrifice. Then there are lesser rituals performed by mediums who dabble in the spirit realm for those they represent in the cultural group, sometimes individualistic interests. Sometimes the rite is for healing with herbs and other rituals. Sometimes poisons are mixed for selected people. Those desirous of revenge on their enemies, spouses, and family often visit mediums to assuage the desires of their hearts, both evil or good intentions. I've noted before the incidents where mediums have performed rituals intent on gaining money and power in Uganda by sacrificing humans for their intents and purposes. It's not a myth or a concocted story. Even a pastor who committed his life to the preaching of the gospel confessed that 10 years prior he deceived his wife and took his second-born son to sacrifice in a ritual intended for securing wealth for himself and another person. Yes, the son was sacrificed. The son is no longer alive. The son is dead. Those who would like to glorify the cultural ritual practices of all more ancient people groups are erroneous in their complete acceptance of all these cultural traditions, in a sort of an attempt at reversing colonization's influence. Since colonization, I would purport that no longer do we have pure indigenous, self-actualized cultural rituals and traditions. The influence and the mirroring of culture began when the first white man arrived. Where modernization has exploited and influenced indigenous culture in negative ways is by introducing overwhelming elements of evil, whether it's greed, war, usury, manipulation, thereby swaying the indigenous cultures to seek those ideologies from their own culture and consulting the mediums for the ways they can benefit or overcome the new influence. The indigenous culture carries its own evil traditions, but encountering an outside influence either sways the balance into the good or into the evil. Stay tuned for further clips of spirituality and faith in Uganda.